and welcome to Amanda's Wellbeing Podcast, a podcast where we discuss all things relating to your well-being, including interviews with experts in the fields of nutrition, physical and mental health, and my 5-minute food facts series. I am Amanda Hayes, your host, a nutritionist with a passion for well-being. Before I introduce today's guests, I will mention that although I will often be speaking with experts, any information or advice provided in Amanda's Wellbeing Podcast is not intended to be used to treat, cure or prevent injuries or medical conditions, and is not a substitute for advice from your own health professional. Today I am here with Doctor of Psychology, Olympian and homegrown Adelaidean Amber Halliday. Amber and I chat about her elite sporting career, first in rowing, where she represented Australia twice in the Olympics, and then in cycling. In 2011, Amber suffered a tragic cycling accident, which left her with severe traumatic brain injury. We talk about how she recovered from this, not least of which was having to adapt her identity as a sports person. Fast forward to today, and Amber's recently set up an online coaching business for women in sport called She Thrives in Sport. So it's my great pleasure to chat with Amber Halliday today. Hi Amber, welcome to Amanda's Wellbeing Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. And Amber, I'd like to start by chatting a bit about your sporting career. You were an elite rower. So when did you start rowing and what drew you towards it?
You want the barefaced truth is that I was pretty crappy at tennis at school. Like seriously, that is what that is sort of the reason why I went to rowing as a school sport. A few of the popular girls were doing it, and I quite liked the idea of being a coxswain. I was a smaller girl, so I started out as a coxswain, and I quite liked the idea of bossing around those popular girls. So, and I was hopeless at tennis, so I had no hand-eye ball coordination, very typical of a rower. And I also what drew me a little bit towards the sport is that my dad was a rower.
I wondered about that.
Yeah. So I don't actually attribute it that much to him, but I feel like I went to rowing and I felt at home.
What kind of boat did you start rowing in?
Well, I mean, we started off at school in like I said, I was the coxswain, so we had a quad scull, and we were in the quad sculls when we were youngest, and then we went to a 4, and then we got up into the 8s, like the first 8 and the second 8 and what have you. I was lucky enough to go straight into the first 8 and row with my sister, so that was
brilliant.
That was cool. And then I had another year in the first 8, and then it was the tumultuous, the dramatic challenge of going to rowing beyond school.
So just before we talk about that, can you just explain to people who might not know what the different types of boats are?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it's probably really confusing for an outsider, but in rowing we have 2 types of rowing, I guess, sculling and sweep. And sculling is with an oar in each hand, and so obviously the single scull is one person in a boat with an oar in each hand, and then you've got sweep rowing, which is one oar in both hands. And so the smallest boat there is the pair. It's a boat of 2 people, 1 oar each person, and that's the boat that goes right up to 8s. But sculling, the biggest boat, is the quad scull.
Right. Did you have a favourite at all or not?
Well,
really?
Of course, my favourite was the double scull, because that's my Olympic boat. That's the only boat that lightweights could make at the Olympics, and I was a lightweight rower, and I'm sure we'll get into that later. But
we will.
Yeah, beyond school. So once you get beyond school and beyond junior rowing, you get into lightweight and heavyweight categories, and so the only Olympic boat in lightweight is the double scull, and so that was my boat.
Okay. Well, actually, now that we're talking about it, let's just talk about lightweight for a woman rower. What is the weight cutoff?
Well, it is okay. So you have 57 crew average, with no person
Oh,
allowed to be more than 59 kilos. So if you can
okay.
imagine a boat of two people, it's pretty easy. We'll go with the easier calculation, the double scull rather than the quad scull. But the double scull, like say for example, if my crewmate is a little bit taller than me, she might weigh
Hmm.
in at 58 kilos, and I will then have to weigh in at 56 kilos to get an average of 57 kilos.
Right. And when did you weigh in before the race? How long before the race?
Between 2 and 1 hours before the race. So
Oh, right.
yeah, you had to be quite close. Like you had to sort of in the days leading up to your weigh in, you had to be within striking distance of that
Yeah.
weight.
Yeah. Was it easy for you to make that weight? Like, was that kind of your physical, natural kind of weight, or did you have to do some horrible sort of hellish saunas and things like that to achieve it?
Yeah, it was hard. It was hard for me.
Yeah.
But do you know what? If it wasn't hard, then I probably wouldn't have reached the level that I did.
Yep.
Because everyone at that level cuts it fine. Yes, I was definitely a lightweight that struggled, which was like sort of funny because I was on the shorter end. But I guess it took me a few seasons to get to know myself and to get to know, what I craved eating, and what sort of diet worked for me, and
Hmm.
how to shed weight responsibly, and then how to just squeeze out the last little bit leading up to weigh in. Like in terms of, I'm not sure if we should talk about this, but because I don't want to give the wrong impression or set a bad example, but everyone, pretty much everyone in every weight restricted sport, like they dehydrate
Yep.
themselves a little bit to
Yeah.
to get down to weight, because it is quite a short term and quite a big, you can drop a kilo as a 57-kilo girl or a 58-kilo girl. You can dehydrate a kilo, and for the short term, it's actually not that bad.
Yeah, I know jockeys do
Yeah,
similar things. I think, as you say, in weight dependent sports, it's pretty much common practice, I would say.
yeah. Everyone's saying Rocky, right?
Yeah. So if we go back to your rowing career, so after school you rowed at Adelaide Uni Boat Club. During that time you won numerous interstate quad scull races. And for many of those races, you were the stroke. Was that a coxless or a coxed boat?
No, definitely coxless. There's not much that
Yeah.
is coxed at the elite level. There's only the
Yeah,
eight,
I'm
really.
sure.
Yeah.
So can you tell us then what, as the stroke, what were some of the responsibilities you had?
Well, as you get like to a higher and higher level, I don't think this. I think the stroke's importance actually diminishes, because
Hmm.
it becomes more of a shared responsibility between everyone in the boat, to set the rhythm and everything. But really, the stroke does set the rhythm, and quite often in a coxless boat, they will have the steering foot, which if
Yes.
if you can imagine well, you would know about it, Amanda, but if your listeners can imagine that the rudder is attached with wires, and instead of a coxswain pulling the strings, it's attached to your foot plate, and you just move your foot left and right to go to left and to send the boat left and right. So quite often the stroke is doing that. But to tell you the truth, I enjoyed it much better when I was in a boat where it wasn't the stroke's responsibility to do that.
I guess it's just another added pressure of something that could potentially, but hopefully not go wrong.
Yeah, I think
um,
they give it to the stroke because the stroke can see the stern of the boat. But I was
yes.
fine steering from bow or three or wherever I was. I was quite obsessed about steering. So that was my job
Okay.
wherever I was.
Okay. And then you went on to row in the World Rowing Championships. And I think that it sounds like some of the locations were pretty spectacular.
Oh my gosh, Amanda, do you know where God rose? That is in a place called Lucerne in Switzerland. Like it's
Wow.
got this beautiful lake, which just happens to be about 6 lanes wide, which is a rowing course.
Hmm.
Or 2Ks long, with just a little bit extra for warm up and a little bit extra for cool down, and it's set in a beautiful valley, and so that's where God rose, because it's perfect. It's a perfect course, and it's naturally occurring.
Oh, you're so lucky, aren't you, to have seen some of those
Oh,
locations? They sound
I'm
amazing.
so grateful. Yeah.
So during the World Rowing Championships, you had some notable successes. I'll just mention a few because there were many. In You made your debut, I think, in 1999, where you
Oh,
won the
100 years ago.
the under 23 world champions in the lightweight double scull. And then you went on to win 3 gold medals in 2001 in a lightweight quad scull, and then again in 2002 in a lightweight double scull, and then for the third time in 2007, again in a lightweight double scull. In the 2001 race, I believe you set 2 world records. So that's amazing. Do you know if they still stand?
Do you know what? I think they actually got broken by the Australian crew the very next year.
Oh,
It
really?
was a massive, but I have to say that in Lucerne that year that we won the world title in the world's best time, that was absolutely flat. And then the next year in Seville, where the Australian crew of that year came along and broke it. Um, that was a massive tailwind. So,
Oh,
I just
okay.
had to put that in there.
And then you also rode in the Olympics twice, 2004 in Athens and 2008 in Beijing. And before we touch on those races, I'd just love to know, what was it like being at the Olympics and representing Australia? Was it like a dream come true?
Yeah, well, it was so surreal. It's like going to the world championships but on steroids, because it was the
Yeah.
Olympics and everyone was there. Everyone was, having essentially their world championships, everyone all
All at
together.
once.
Yeah, so it was amazing. And at the world championships, you obviously don't get the same experiences that you do at the Olympics, like the Olympic Village, and oh my gosh, the
Yeah.
Olympic dining hall. Like, that is incredible. They call the Olympic dining hall the happiest place on earth. Open for what is it, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 2 weeks of the year, every 4 years. So
Wow.
so it's a pretty incredible place. And um, I mean, the Olympics are just an incredible experience.
It must be so much fun once you've got your race done and all the nerves are gone. My son, who's 19, said, Oh, can you ask Amber about the Olympic Village? I hear it's sick.
Well, it is, and it's really good fun, because once you do your competition and you wallow for a little bit, or at least I did. You wallow for a little bit, in it's so bittersweet. You have to balance, like, your, if you didn't perform as well as you thought, maybe your disappointment, you have to balance that with your just experiencing things and
Yeah.
lapping it up and being in the moment.
Yeah.
And so the whole second week of the games for rowers is fantastic, because what you do in the morning, you sort of wake up and you go and you put your name down for all the events that you want to go see. You get your tickets, and then you get into you go get your food, and from the dining hall, and then you get on the bus and you go and see these top class, world
Wow.
class performances, just
Oh,
every
that
day.
just sounds so amazing. Wow. You alluded to wallowing a bit. So let's talk about your races. In
Mm,
2004 in Athens, in the double scull, you set the world's best time in the heat, and then you came fourth in the final. And then in 2008, again in the double scull, you came eighth. And I did do a little bit of reading about those races, and you said somewhere that your results did not match your potential. So, for example, in Beijing, you entered the regatta as the then current world champions, but you didn't have a podium finish. So that must have been pretty devastating. So how did you come to terms with that? And did you have any support, like psychologists or anything like that?
Well, yes, athletes who are supported in Australia by state institutes, state and national institutes, they have really good support, and especially nowadays, really good support. And so it was there if I wanted to access it. But in terms of a systematic sort of debriefing in those days, that didn't happen. And I still feel like there's a lot of stuff that is unprocessed from that. But I feel like I found my own coping mechanism at the time, and that was to go to cycling. Because, you know, I just transferred over sideways straight away into the cycling program at SASI, the South Australian Sports Institute. They were pretty happy to have me. I was, you know, physically primed. I just had to pick up the skills and whatnot of being a cyclist. But I feel like I pedaled my way through my psychological recovery from Beijing. Apart from that unprocessed stuff.
Just before we move on to cycling, one thing that I think is absolutely amazing about rowing, even if you're not an elite rower, even at club level where I was, it is an all-encompassing sport and it's very time-consuming. I don't know if people appreciate how much rowers train. So can you just give us an overview of a typical week for you, like a sort of leading up to a competition before you're tapering or anything like that? Just what did it look like?
It would look like always a session on the water in the morning, because where we trained in Adelaide, Australia, that was definitely the best water. First thing in the morning, the session would last, you know, 90 minutes to 2 hours. We would do 16 to 20 Ks depending on the size of the boat. You know, we could be rowing singles that day, or we could be in the double scull or quad scull or whatever. And then I would also usually ride my bike to training, because I liked having that extra mileage in my legs, really. And then usually in the afternoon, it would be a gym session, and like, I guess normal people would count this as 3 sessions in the afternoon, but we counted it as one. We went to the gym and my coach would set us a very hard ergo, like a rowing machine. So we would do that for up to an hour, and then we would go into the weights room and lift our weights for an hour and a half. And then we would go to the recovery centre and have our recovery session, which, you know, hot and cold water, spa bath, and sometimes massage and that sort of thing. So that was pretty much the typical day. Most days were on the water in the morning, and most days were in the gym in the afternoon.
Right. So in terms of time, it must have taken up, you know, 6 hours or something of your day.
It was a full-time job. It was 40 hours a week, but because we got up at the crack, like before the crack of dawn, to be at the boat shed, usually I think for most of my rowing career, it was 5:45 arrive at the boat shed. And I think nowadays, because the traffic is just slightly worse, everyone arrives there at 5:30. And so you do get a lot of stuff done before most people are waking up. And I think rowers are very proud of that as well.
Yeah, I agree. Where did you do most of this training?
At West Lakes in Adelaide. We were really lucky to have basically the national program for lightweight women was with my coach in Adelaide. I guess that's because of us, because of my strong teammates, because of Adrian being the coach. Adrian was the coach for most of the time, Adrian David, and so because of that, they allowed us to train the national program in Adelaide rather than in those days, most of the national programs were in Canberra.
Yes, I wondered about that. Well, you were lucky then because I assume that meant you could live at home.
Yes, well, I
Yeah.
lived at home until, I mean, I thought I was pushing it in those days, until, what was I, 25, and then moved out and on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I could be,
24 and out the door.
yeah, I could be with my, I could be close to my family, and they could still provide a lot of support for me.
And apart from your coach, did you have any other support throughout that period, like dietitians or physiotherapists and things like that?
Oh, who said the coach was a support? Well, that's another story. I could do a whole nother podcast on him, but yes, being part of the South Australian Sports Institute, we had access to nutritionists and to psychologists, and then we ended up getting a little bit of support to go see our physiotherapists, because that was basically the biggest cost that we had as rowers.
Mm.
Before we got financial support for that, it was a huge cost, and it probably meant that we were going backwards financially. I mean, well, most of us were just uni students, or
Yeah.
couldn't really have a full-time job on top of a full-time job. And so, yeah, but I think we ended up getting really good support, and I think the support now is really good.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. Um, so we were starting to talk about cycling after Beijing.
Mm.
You cycled your way to recovery and you trained at SASI, which is the South Australian Sports Institute. You alluded to this before. I think there is a very good crossover between rowing and cycling because those sports are quite dependent on your legs being very strong. Would you
Yes,
say that's a fair comment?
that's true, and a lot of people don't understand that rowing really is a leg sport. Like, you get
Absolutely.
huge arms, and that's pretty cool. But it is mainly about the legs, and so to go to cycling, of course, that's all about the legs. You already have the huge engine,
Mm,
the huge lung capacity, the big VO2 max, and so. Yeah, I think they were really excited when I first came over, because just recently at the time, I think Rebecca Romero she was a rower for the UK team, and then she went to cycling and won a gold medal, I think at
wow.
Beijing, or it could have been at Athens, but yeah, it was a pretty big success story. She went across to um, individual pursuit. Maybe it was a gold medal, maybe it was a world championship medal, I'm not sure. But a lot of the coaches in cycling were really interested in what I could do,
Yeah.
and I just sort of came over and realized that my engine was more of a big diesel, so I did better in the road time trials, which were normally
Yeah.
about like 40 minutes, rather than
Mhm.
trying to condense I mean, our rowing races were about 7 minutes, and trying to condense that into a 4-minute individual pursuit. Rebecca Romero did that very well, but I went the other way, and I expanded out to like a 40-minute time trial on the road.
And you actually achieved success pretty quickly when you crossed over from rowing to cycling. I know that in 2010 you won the Australian time trial, but the year before that, in 2009, you won the Women's Tour of New Zealand. Is that a bit like the Tour Down Under? Is it a similar thing?
Yeah, well, it's a 3-day event
Yeah.
in New Zealand, and like I just think not a lot of people knew me that year, and so they were quite, whatever, this girl's going on a breakaway. Well, we'll just let her go, and she can't be that strong. And then it turns out I was. So so
I love that.
they let a break go with the what ended up being the race winner in it, which was me, and and that was pretty cool. But that didn't happen again.
So what were some of the things you enjoyed about cycling as a sport?
I liked the freedom of it, especially coming from a sport like rowing, where, I felt like we had so much of our training that was monitored and just
Mm.
surveilled by our coach, and I barely did any strokes without him seeing them. And so my coach in cycling trusting me to do the Ks that were on the program myself
Yep.
and to go out there and do it myself, that was great. So I did like that autonomy and that trust that I had from the cycling coaches. And it's also social in a way that rowing can't be,
Yeah.
because you can be too astride and you can chat to the person next to you, and then you do a turn or whatever, and you might end up chatting to someone else. But in rowing, you're looking at somebody's ponytail, or you're looking at the
Yeah.
stern for a lot of the time, and so it's only ever a quick chat at the end of a 2 or a 5K stretch, as you would know.
Yeah, that's a good point. In terms of you being given some autonomy with cycling, I think there are some pretty good ways to measure all the metrics now anyway. Like obviously you'd be wearing a heart rate monitor and have a
Mm.
power meter and a cadence sensor. So your coach could sit back after your ride and have a look to see what you've done too. So
Yes, and we
that
definitely
helps.
we definitely had those. What were they called? The SRMs, I think, the on the bike. We had all sorts of monitoring equipment on the boat, and we could put additional things on when you're doing a biometric session.
Hmm.
Um, so they could like get the force curve of your stroke and all amazing things like that. And then on the bike, like, it was a little bit more compact, but they would put like a power meter in your crank,
Yeah.
and so they could gauge just how much power you're putting down. And like, I imagine that these days it would be integrated with a GPS sort of thing.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, even amateur cyclists have a lot of that gear now, I think. And then, unfortunately, in January 2011, disaster struck for you. You were in a racing accident at Victoria Park Racecourse in Adelaide. And from that, you suffered severe traumatic brain injury and some broken bones. Just looking at you, clearly you've made a good recovery. So, what were some of the important steps in your recovery and your rehabilitation?
In terms of like the physical and cognitive steps in recovery, in the very early days, as soon as they put me in an induced coma, and then
Hmm.
I was learning how to walk and talk,
Oh, my
and
goodness.
then once I sort of got a handle on that, it was about like things like crossing roads, and they had to test me out to see whether I could cook things and sort of
Mm.
combine like the food preparation and cooking and everything
Wow.
safely. Yeah, I remember doing that in the hospital kitchen. It was quite amazing. But they have to make sure you're safe. And then, of course, 9 months later, I was good enough to take my driving test again, and so I was able to drive 9 months after the accident.
Wow.
And so that was a big step. And then I also think another big step in my physical recovery and mental recovery was getting back on the bike. And that took a little
That
bit,
must have been hard.
yeah, that took a little bit longer. But at the time, I was actually coaching rowing, and in Adelaide, in West Lakes, the coaches ride bikes along the side of
Mm.
the lake there, and so I really wanted to get back to riding, because I was coaching, and up until then I was just sort of watching them from the last 250 meters of the course and trying to make a positive impact in what I was saying. But it was the last session that they had. I was coaching schoolgirls. It was the last session that they had before Head of the River of that first season that I got back on the bike.
Oh, you're almost bringing me to tears listening to that. That must have been such a hard step to take sort of mentally to get back on a bike, even though it's in very different circumstances. Were your family and friends a bit nervous about that?
Well, to tell you the truth, it was a matter of my now husband taking me and the bikes in the car to a deserted car park on a
Hmm.
weekend, and we did a few practices on in the car park, and then so that I was ready for that last session at West Lakes. But that was very nerve wracking because you're right by
I
the
bet.
water, and I was like, oh my god,
Yeah.
I hope I don't stack it and fall in. That would just be so embarrassing.
Yeah, because there's quite a few people around who would witness that.
I
Do you
know.
ride at all now, or is that
I
a part of your past? Or
I do actually, like nothing like I used to. But here I'm based in Utah now, and we have some of the best trail riding
oh,
and
cool.
amazing mountains and scenery here. And so I feel like sort of the outsider if I didn't get into mountain biking. So my husband has bought me a very, or we have bought me, he's been in charge of selecting a very nice um, mountain bike for me,
Fantastic.
and it was great. I just went for a ride actually this afternoon and came up with some really good ideas. I was like, oh my gosh, I wonder whether we'll get to that with Amanda. Do you want me to tell you one? Okay, okay.
Yes, please do.
Okay, so I'm on this amazing bike with this dual suspension, and it's really beyond my ability. But I feel like I have this good foundation of this solid bike beneath me, and
Yeah.
it allows me to do more things and take more risks and maybe go over bigger bumps and just get through some tricky sand and that sort of thing. And I was like, oh my god, this is just like the foundation of resilience that I've heard you talk about, and that I obviously study and I'm trying to do at the moment. I really want a lot of people talk about having good roots in the ground, and so then
Hmm.
your tree comes up the top and you can grow the leaves and flourish and everything. But I like the bike analogy. I was like, yes, that is
Yeah.
it. I have a really good bike beneath me, and that allows me to do more.
Yeah, that's an excellent analogy. Going through sand, going over bumps and all of that, and
And
you can do it.
you can keep on your pathway.
Yeah. Did your accident change your outlook on life?
Yeah, well, it I mean, it changed everything. Um,
Yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that.
yeah,
Mm.
it changed. I mean, the biggest thing was that it changed my identity. I was an athlete, and then I wasn't. So what was I? And it also took a while to understand and accept it. Like it took a while to understand, because I actually, when I had my accident, I didn't realize what a brain injury was or what it could do, or I didn't understand that you could get hit in the head and then be in a wheelchair. I
Mm.
didn't know much about that. And I think there was some of that, invincibility of not youth. It's not like I was young at the time, but a hangover from that invincibility of youth, and being a capable athlete and invincible, and
Yeah, and really strong and fit.
yeah, and all that changed, and it took me a while to understand that this wasn't going to be a 6 to 8 week broken rib sort of injury, which is the most common injury in rowing, is probably a rib stress fracture, and
Mhm.
that's like a bad injury, is like a 6 to 8 week recovery. And as I was coming out of the fog of the early days of recovery of brain injury, it took me a while to understand that I wouldn't be going back to rowing, and I wouldn't be trying to make the team for the London Olympics, and I wouldn't be, like I couldn't do the things that
Yeah.
I used to do.
Wow, that must have been really, really tough to come to terms with.
Yeah, well, like I said, I was in the brain injury fog, and so
Mm,
it didn't come down on me like in one moment or all in
no.
one ton of bricks sort of moment, but eventually I came to understand it, and then eventually I came to accept it.
You then studied psychology. You're a doctor in psychology.
Mm,
Was that after your brain injury or before?
no, it was after.
After.
It
So
was
I
after.
guess it sounds a bit like that's part of your new identity
Yes,
that you started to put together.
that.
Um, you'd studied quite a bit before that, I think, during your rowing career, but uh, in your PhD, I believe you was researching into the area of adolescent mental health
Mm,
and well-being. Is that right?
yes,
That's a remarkable recovery, isn't it? To go from having a brain injury to doing a PhD. That's
but
incredible.
do you know what? That was part of the rationale behind it. Is that you know, I was actually working in the media at the time. I was a print journalist, and I just knew that I like print journalism was going the way that it was, and I probably didn't
Mm,
have the profile or the will to make it in the media further. And so I thought I might return to my psychology studies and also kickstart my brain by throwing myself in at the deep end of study. Like the first thing I had to do was to update my previous psychology degree. So I did a psychology undergrad as soon as I came out
mhm.
of school, and you know, ticked that box and went, yeah, okay. And but then 10 years later, it becomes out of date. And so I
Yes.
had to go back to do a grad dip, which is basically doing it all again. But instead of doing it over 3 years, you do it over one.
One of the reasons that you wanted to study that was to have some more insight into your own brain and your own injury, or was it a separate thing?
It definitely, I think it was a contributing factor. It wasn't everything.
Mm,
But yeah, I think like I said, that one of the main things was kickstarting my brain again, and then you know I'm trying like hell to get into honors because that was the big test. And
mhm.
then once I got into honors, like that was a huge achievement and just gave me so much confidence that my brain could work.
Excellent.
And also in honors, I started learning about you know well-being and positive psychology, and you know I felt like it related to my past experiences in sport so much.
Oh, that's excellent. And now you've gone on and founded a business called She Thrives in Sport. It's tailored to female or women athletes, their coaches, and their parents. And your aim is to assist them to build resilience, performance, and well-being in sport. So when did you launch that?
Well, I think it's been a matter of weeks that we've been live.
Wow.
Yeah, you know, I started working on this online learning platform idea maybe last year, and then I started sort of developing it this year, and then the coronavirus hit, and I was
Oh,
like, oh my
yeah.
god, everyone's going online, everyone's doing online courses, let's try and get mine live quickly. And then I sort of have just got it live for for everyone to go back and be sick of online learning. But I think the whole reason behind it, you know, back last year when I was thinking about everything, I was thinking, you know, sport set me up for life.
Yes, it
I
did.
feel like sport gave me the skills, like the emotional skills, the psychological skills, to get through my accident, and to get through life beyond that, to do a PhD, to have a baby during my PhD, and to move continents here to the US. And I feel like, you know, I have that amazing base of sport. I have that amazing top-notch bike beneath me, of the foundation that was set up through sport. And
Mhm.
so, I was thinking about it, and I was like, I want girls in sport to have a shortcut to this. It took me 15 years of being an athlete in two sports. It took me a life-threatening accident and then a PhD in psychology to sort of bring this all together. But I
Mhm.
feel like this is a shortcut for athletes. This is everything that I wanted to know at the beginning of my. This is everything I would have liked to know at the beginning of my
Yeah.
elite journey, and also it it is everything I want young athletes to know who don't go all the way to the Olympics or world championships. I want them
S
to realize what sport gives them.
Yes. So what do you offer? What does She Thrives in Sport offer to athletes?
Well, we're starting small. Like I said, we've just gone live in the last few weeks with my signature course, which is the I Thrive course for
Mhm.
female athletes. There's also, I do coaching. I do remote coaching, and and then I guess as soon as it is safe to gather, I will. I have also put myself out there as speaking, workshops, presentations, that sort of thing,
Excellent.
which I have done a lot in my life, but never under the guise of specifically She Thrives in Sport for
Mhm, mhm.
female athletes. So, and then I'm currently working on a course for coaches of female athletes, which
Ah, interesting.
yeah, well, you'd be surprised how many people come up to me, especially here in America, and they say, "Oh, you used to be an athlete? Oh, I coach my daughter's softball team. Can you tell me how to coach girls, or tell me how to coach women?" Or, like, it's amazing how many people have asked me as a female athlete how to coach girls, and it's like, oh, surely it's not that much different. And then I looked into it, and it was like, yeah,
Yes.
it's actually, it's just a different style. And I've written it for my coach of 10 years, Adrian David, my big he's a big Romanian guy, and a lot of this stuff I would have wanted him to know.
Well, I'm just going to digress a little bit because when I was reading, doing some background reading before I spoke to you today, I had a look at some scientific journals, and I read one article I read was called Factors Affecting the Coaching of Elite Women Athletes. And one of the things it mentions is that most elite sport coaches are men. So I think it's a ratio of 10 men to 1 women. And because of that, most women end up being coached by a male.
Mm,
And given that, a male coach has often been an elite athlete himself, he draws on his own experience that are very male centric experiences. And therefore, he can lack an understanding of any specific issues that face women. And the other problem is that it can hamper the movement towards gender equality in sport because it's just not something that's really on their agenda. So, just in from your own personal experience, do you think that women being coached by men, there are some issues there?
well, I think, it's
I
just.
mean, in general, I
Yeah,
guess.
of course, everything's in general, and
Mm.
I'm like, my mum will tell you that I'm the last person that wants to admit to any difference between genders or whatever, but
Oh,
we can
absolutely.
be equal without being the same. So,
Yeah.
I think we've got slightly different styles. Women are brought up a certain way with certain expectations. Men are brought up a different way. We definitely treat our sons and daughters differently, and that results in different, like, thinking processes and that sort of
Mm.
thing as they become like an adolescent and beyond athlete. So, there are definitely things that females respond to differently to male athletes. Yeah, so a lot of it
Yeah,
is just reinforcing that.
and it's not, we're not talking about it whether it's a positive or negative thing, a difference between men and women. It's simply acknowledging that they're different and may respond in different ways. And clearly there's a need for it, because you've already, just on an anecdotal level, said that women have come up to you and said, "How do I coach girls?" So it's
Well,
good that
they were mainly the blokes that came up and asked
I
me.
see.
But
Well, at least they're interested.
yes, well, I congratulate them for wanting to
Mm,
find out more. And this is the whole idea. I guess this is one of the things behind She Thrives in Sport, is that when, like I said, late last year, when I was thinking, I might actually enter the world of sports psychology, which I was always in denial that I was interested in, but I actually kind of am. And I did a bunch of research, and since then I have also just poked around on the internet and found out what, when you do a search for sports psychology and women or female athletes, that it comes up to how to coach female athletes. It is directed at the male coach, and it is how to coach female athletes. And it's a number of like ideas that some I agree with, some I don't. But
mhm.
anyway, that was the only thing popping up. Female athletes were being spoken about but not spoken to, and
Yeah.
and so that's why, like, it was important for me for my signature course to be the first one live that is the one speaking to female athletes. We're talking psychology, sports psychology for performance, resilience and well-being in sport, but we're talking to female athletes. We're not talking about them.
That's excellent, because for an elite sports person, or a musician for that matter, there's a lot more than just raw talent. There's commitment, drive, determination, and the right state of mind. And you're mentioning that you're talking to women about that. So, how important do you think is the psychological aspect of elite sport?
Oh, well, it's a big factor. It's a decisive factor. Of course, I would say that because here I am. This is where I've come from. But I would refer anyone who's interested to Angela Duckworth's work. She does amazing work on grit, and through her, and grit
Ah,
is sort of the concept of mental toughness in sport,
yep,
or persistence, determination, passion, and perseverance. And she has, through her studies, she massive, well-run studies on how much of success is actually explained by grit, versus and it is huge. You
yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that. I think it's an absolutely fascinating area. I remember when I was 16, I was a ball girl at the SA Men's Open and then the then Rio um, Open. And to practice, we practiced doing our ball person skills in all the qualifying matches. And I was utterly blown away by how many people were out there who had devoted their entire life to tennis. A lot of them, slept in their cars to afford to go to all the different matches and tournaments. And I think some of them maybe had the technical skill or whatever, but perhaps they lacked that mental toughness, the kind of toughness you see in players like Federer and Nadal, where they can just block everything out and focus on that moment. It must be so important.
Yes, it will. Like I said, it's a decisive factor, and I've
Mm,
I've seen it work both ways in athletes. Having reasonably long career like I did, I saw a lot of athletes who were super talented. They were part of the talent identification program, and they had money pumped into them. They had the long limbs. They were meant to succeed. That the measurements, the physiological
yeah.
measurements
So
said so
on paper,
on
mm,
paper, but they don't do any psychometrics to judge whether you know an athlete has the X factor, or has the grit.
Yeah.
And many of these talented athletes, these talent ID athletes, I saw just come and go. They showed promise and then they just didn't have it when it counted. But I also saw some athletes who were not rated as highly physiologically. They didn't have as big a VO2 max. They didn't have as longer femurs or whatever the measure was,
Hmm.
but they had amazing amounts of passion and discipline and perseverance, and they made it.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I read a really good book about that by Matt Fitzgerald called How Bad Do You Want It? And he does go into some of that kind of thing where he talks about people that, based on their physical characteristics, shouldn't make it as a rower or a cyclist, but they do.
Mm.
Because as you say, they've got that grit, that passion, that determination. So it's decisive. What do you think are some of the things that are specific to women and girls? Like, are there any things that you need to work on with them that are important, do you think, for girls?
I there is the when you look at the statistics, obviously things like body image and energy intake
Mm.
are big things for female athletes. They are also big things for male athletes, and where female athletes might feel the pressure of being having to perform in sport and have the body that gives them that performance, and they sort of have to balance that with looking feminine or feeling feminine, or uh, it, it, it's it is also rearing its head for male athletes as well.
Mm.
Although male athletes, like, when being muscly and being strong tends to fit the idea of being masculine as well. So we've got some work to do there. That's some society wide issues.
There are some movements, body image acceptance movements. And I interviewed a woman who runs sort of bushwalking courses for girls. It's called Strong Daughters. So the focus is on strength and resilience rather than, the physical body image, which is good.
I'm just so pleased to see so many muscly bods on women, like on Instagram. I follow,
Yeah.
I think it's something like female athlete or women in sport or whatever. And there's so many amazing bodies that are athletic and strong, and they're of women, and they're proud. They're proud,
Yeah.
which is what I learned in my 15 years of being an elite athlete. Eventually, I think it was year 7 or something, I became proud of my biceps.
Excellent. That's very good to hear. I like stories like that. One thing that I'm personally quite interested in is choking, which is also part of the psychological aspect of sport. And academics kind of debate the actual definition, but most people know what it is. It's when you don't sort of reach your potential under perceived pressure. So, are there some ways that people can deal with that in sport?
Yes, well, there we do address many ways in my course, for example, and I sort of take the foundational view that if the foundation is right, if you have a strong bike beneath you, then normally it it affects the pointy end where choking becomes a thing or not. We address the foundation, and we also address
Mhm.
things like visualization and physiological arousal. And this is all part of a chapter in my course called Insight,
Mhm.
which is about getting to know yourself and getting to know your body, being aware of your activation, knowing how to manage it, visualizing things so that you're not so anxious leading up to competition.
Mhm.
I think all of that helps with that pointy end where choking
Yep.
might occur.
So, in other words, if you have the right support, it's something that can hopefully be overcome.
If you have the right support, anything can be overcome. But yeah, if you have the right foundational skills and then some specific skills as we come up towards the sort of more specialized, pointier end of the pyramid, then that's my pathway to
Mhm.
addressing things like choking.
For people that are interested then in working with you, how do they do that?
Well, they can go check out what we offer at the moment
Mhm.
at shethrivesinsport.com. You can email. I've got an Instagram account that is up and running. I have She Thrives in Sport on LinkedIn, and so they can follow me a few different ways there. They can look at the curriculum that I have in
Yep.
the I Thrive course for female athletes,
Mhm.
and very soon there is a little bit of information up there on the My Athlete Thrives course for coaches, and
Excellent.
my daughter Thrives, which is a course for parents that I'm also working on. So
That's a great idea, I think.
well, I feel like it fills a gap, and
Yeah, absolutely.
women have not been spoken to or addressed in the world of sports psychology, and so with this, I really want to reach out to them.
You know what's really great about that is that I think parents are kind of often the unsung heroes in this, because for sports like rowing, before you have your license and the kids need to be at West Lakes at
Yeah.
6 o'clock in the morning, if their parents didn't drive them there, they couldn't do it.
Mhm.
Um, and I guess parents also need to have some skills to manage the ups and downs, the disappointments, the wins, the sleep, the feeding the athlete, all those things. And I think, as you say, women, it's often the mother doing this. They're not really spoken to. So it's great to hear that you've got a course designed for athletes' parents.
Yes, and I will absolutely both. I will speak to both the father and the mother in the parents' course,
Mm.
but really, it's the first time that somebody's really spoken about understanding of an athlete as a daughter rather than a son.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Because also swimming's another sport that comes to mind where parents are sacrificing a lot for their kids to excel in that sport.
Yes, I think one of the happiest moments of my parents' life was when my big sister got her license, and we were rowing in the first eight together. So that was pretty
Perfect.
good for them. Yeah.
Yeah, even without having elite athletes in my family, I was happy when my son got his license. It's a good day. You said your course is online, so therefore, even though you're based in Utah at the moment, you can work with people from anywhere. Is that right?
Yes. Generally in Australia, the athletes it's an early morning call for them,
Hmm.
because yeah, my evening here is your morning there, and then
Yes.
your afternoon is my middle of the night. So, but we have found ways to speak over Zoom or Google Chat or whatever, and so I have these coaching sessions. I'd sort of bundled them together as three
Hmm.
coaching sessions, and I'm not a psychologist, so they are definitely not like mental health consultations, but I just aim to find and bring to the fore an athlete's strengths, and maybe suggest a few things about challenges or weaknesses that they have, um, and give them confidence. I think
Oh, that
go,
sounds
going
amazing.
back to what we were talking about, one of the main things with female athletes, and I spoke about body image and eating stuff, but I also think another major thing is confidence. The
Yeah.
way that we think of confidence, the way that we display confidence might be different to what we see on the movies, which is mostly, if you think of a sporting story that's a movie, it's usually a a guy, and it's usually Hollywoodified, and so we have to sort of rethink our concept of confidence, and that determines how we get it.
Well, you are definitely doing some excellent things for elite women in sport. So that is wonderful. So, Amber, I'll come to my final question now, which I like to ask all my guests. If you could recommend 2 things that people could do to improve their well-being, what would they be?
Well, I think the first one's not a surprise, and that's physical activity.
Yeah.
Physical activity for me is huge. And I've seen some research saying that it's basically equivalent to pharmacological intervention for things like depression or low-level depression. And so I personally feel much better after I've gone for a ride in the mountains. And physical activity for me, especially outside or with other people, is amazingly rejuvenating. And of course, athletes, they don't really have that problem of like too little physical activity. So what they should do is go to my site, go to She Thrives in Sport, and look up the Swift, the little Swift tab at the top, and that's my way of categorizing the important things for them, for their well-being.
So just quickly tell us what SWIFT stands for.
Okay, well, it's going to have to be super quick. But SWIFT is skills, willpower, insight, fun, and teamwork. And these are, 5 categories of well-being, resilience, and performance concepts that I think are they are formulated for an athlete. Like, there are lots of wellbeing frameworks out there, and many of them, rightly so, pointing out physical activity as a major thing contributing to your wellbeing. But athletes sort of have that one done and dusted.
They have it covered, yeah.
So this is a framework for resilience, performance, and wellbeing that is for them.
Oh, excellent. And now back to your second recommendation for well-being.
Well, actually, in my studies and in my experience, the most powerful thing for me has been gratitude. And when you think about it, it works on like several levels. It works on the emotional level, in that it gets you in the feelies, as my friend would say. It gets you in the feelies when you give it. And it works on a cognitive level, in that it helps you reframe things. Like when I was, getting over my accident, I used gratitude to help me reframe things and go, well, no, actually, I'm really grateful that my accident was at home with my family in the Australian health system. I'm so grateful that, I've only come out of it with a gammy eye and a gammy leg. It could have been much worse. I can work, I can talk, I can ride a bike, I can drive a car. So that, to me, being grateful for those things helped me reframe that accident. And also it works on a relational level. So I can't imagine that it would ever not improve a relationship or not strengthen a relationship when you show your gratitude.
Yeah, well, that's a really lovely way to end this podcast. So I will put a link to She Thrives in Sport and your Instagram account and everything in the show notes. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, Amber. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
That was the remarkable and resilient Dr. Amber Halliday. I'll put links to She Thrives in Sport and all Amber's socials in the show notes. Thank you for listening to my podcast today. I do hope you enjoyed it and that you found something maybe interesting or inspirational in my chat with Amber. You can subscribe to my podcast, Amanda's Wellbeing Podcast, on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button, and while you're there, click on the bell to be alerted when new episodes are available. You can also subscribe on your favourite podcast app. including iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, Spotify, or Google Podcasts. You can follow the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Direct links to all social media can be found on the subscribe page of my website at www.amandaswellbeingpodcast.com. If you would like to contact me, you can send me a message via the contacts page on my website. Please feel free to suggest topics you'd like to learn more about, and I'll do my best to deliver that to you. Finally, please take a minute to leave a rating on iTunes. It improves visibility, it helps people find my podcast, and it will inspire me to keep finding interesting guests in the wellbeing space to interview. Thank you for tuning in. Eat well, move well, think well.